Welcome to Femin Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portella, and today we are doing a feminist critique of All of a Night of Seven Kingdoms, a show that I will preface by saying I fucking love, okay? But I am having this conversation with Alexandra Stamson. Now, Alexandra Stamson is a lecturer and a PhD candidate in philosophy at UConn. She is also a public philosopher working as a resident lecturer with lectures on tap in New York City. As a feminist philosopher, Alex has developed a new theory of identity understanding, which allows her to examine how environments can impact the way that we understand ourselves and others. Alex also works on identity representation in popular fiction, examining the impact that fictional narratives have on our social world. Alex is a wonderful, amazing, lovely human being. I hope you guys love this conversation. I had a wonderful time talking to her. Alex is so incredible, so smart, so engaging. Please go check out her work. Of course, all of the links to where you can find her and where you can find her work will be down in the show notes. And go enjoy this episode. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Julia, how are you?
I'm so happy you're here. Just a delight and friendly face. So we're here talking about a property we both loved, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, to which when I got your email that you were like, have you watched this thing and did you like it? Have never been more delighted in my entire life.
I was like, I know, let's talk. I need to talk about this. And Julia, I need to talk to Julia about that.
Yeah. You and I align on so many different things, especially pop culturally, when we're examining these properties, especially genre-based properties, like through this lens of feminism. And I really loved this show, and a lot of the things that we loved about it, which is where we'll start, almost contradict like the innate pieces of ourselves that are so rooted in this like feminist identity. It was one of the things that I really thought about in like the larger Thrones context. So I'm excited to talk about that today, but let's definitely start with what we liked, because we both really, really enjoyed this TV show. I think it's my favorite TV show that I've seen all year. I mean, we're pretty early into the year, but putting this up against like hey, House of the Dragon is coming back in June, and I was like, it's got two female main characters. So what did you like about it? What was your favorite piece, or what stuck you?
Honestly, it was one of those things where I was like, I will watch literally anything that's in that universe, so put it in front of me. And so I was getting there. I just never got to it. And I was like, finally, you know what, whatever, we're going to watch it. And it just caught me by surprise. I didn't read it ahead of time. I had no idea what I was about to go watch. And it was funny and it was light. And Game of Thrones is not, that word does not fit with Game of Thrones ever. And it was really, I think, amazing to have that lightness come into the world, and for like once I started to read into it, to know that Martin was making it, like he was on set producing it and doing it. And after what we got with the end of Game of Thrones, it just seemed like such a relief to be like, oh wow, okay, we're getting a light, fun story from the guy who made the world. And like that, just like step one, like that was.
So I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. I've definitely shared this on this podcast before. I like got roped into Game of Thrones through a man. And when I think about this, I'm always like disgusted with myself, because I just tend to dislike things, even when they're a really good story, that tend to be like hyper gore, which I feel like I had sat down and watched like the first 3 minutes of Game of Thrones and was like, it's not for me. No, thank you. And it kind of grew pop culturally, and something that I've also learned about myself as like years have gone on is that when there's a lot of noise around something in like the cultural zeitgeist, I just want to watch it just to see what people are talking about, to be involved in the conversation or have an opinion about it. And I never like reached that with Game of Thrones. Like it was happening around me. Yeah, it was. And this is always like, more than anything, I fucking hate zombie shows. And like the second that people started talking about The Last of Us during
that was the best show ever.
During the pandemic, when it was like hitting its resurgence before the TV show came out, right? Like I sat down and watched during my quarantine, sat down and watched the whole gameplay.
Wow.
And I was like, I really love this story.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited when the show came out, and I hate stuff like that. Like, and I don't really like video games. Like, I don't know. Anyway, so a lot of stuff like will just reach me through like the culture zeitgeist. And I'm like, okay, that seems like it has like longevity to it. And it's weird because Game of Thrones never did. But I dated this guy who was like, I'm reading all of the Game of Thrones books. Like, have you ever read them? Because he knew I was a reader. And I was like, no. And he's like, but you like fantasies. Like, I think you should like give it a go. And lent me his books and I read them. And I always look back on this too, because I would read them so fast because I read about a bajillion books a year. And he was like, there's surely no way that you've read this before. And I was like, sir, I went to school for Shakespearean theater. I have been reading in Old English my entire life. This is not a difficult book. Thank you. Anyway, like I think about it and like I start sweating. I'm like, ew, who were you little pick me? And then we've all had to go through it in different ways. So I read the books and I fell in love with the books because the books have a lot more fantastical elements to it and mystical elements to it than the show does in its existence. So that's how I was really like kind of pulled into Game of Thrones. And I've been reflecting a lot about like the Game of Thrones universe at large and what this story really meant to me, because I read the Dunk and Egg books almost immediately after I finished the novel, all of the A Song of Ice and Fire, and immediately fell in love with these two characters and then like never thought about them again because I again read a bajillion books a year. And so when I saw like spring is coming this winter, I was like, oh, okay. And same thing, like had a lot of really a lot of joy that George was so involved in it, because the show made me fall in love with, I think, what Game of Thrones as a universe could be. Whereas, like, in these other two really specific properties that we get, because they're so laser focused on characters, because there's so many more characters that are involved in both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. By the time we get to the end of Game of Thrones, like by the time we're in season 8, you're following like 12 plot lines. Like there's so many characters. I actually like recently rewatched the first episode of Game of Thrones and I was like, there's a fucking lot happening right now. Like in the first episode. Yeah. So, what I think this show does really well is extend this universe to a place where you realize that there's more that's happening outside of King's Landing, or more that's happening, than like just this Game of Thrones, that there's this chasing of the Iron Throne. This is not the objective of our character. And unlike the other Game of Thrones properties, we are solely in Dunk's POV. I think we leave it twice with Egg. I think we leave it once when Egg is preparing to, be his squire, and again when he is about to kill his brother. Spoiler alert. He doesn't, but the temptation is high for all of us involved watching along. And it diverts once more at the end to be with Maekar when he realizes that Egg is not there. So we're really rooted in Dunk's POV, which I think I really enjoy, because it really is Dunk from Flea Bottom, this hedge knight with nothing and nobody. He had one person, Sir Arlen, and like that person's gone, and what do I do now? And that, I think, is a really interesting story compared to these very ambitious, on a much higher stakes, because it's King's Landing. This is very low stakes. Can I lie about being a knight? And can I get away with it? And can I make something more of my life through this lie that's seemingly harmless, that becomes the root of integrity around what even is knighthood? Something that George explores across all of his properties. And this really, he doesn't make knights to be out to be this like chivalrous thing. He makes it out to be like the gruesome, gory, war-torn experience that it was. And I enjoyed that about this. I enjoyed watching a character with integrity, with morals, who hasn't been tainted by this idea of like corrupted power and isn't seeking it, is just seeking to make himself like just better than he was. Maybe I don't have to be a hedge knight. Maybe a lord will see my potential and I could have a roof over my head and stable income. Like he's just trying to make his life better. And I find that to be very endearing. And I found the subversion of the typical Game of Thrones, genre storytelling that it does to be really endearing. I don't know. I found it to be very charming. And funny.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a good point that I really didn't like consider as much until you're saying all this. And that what I think is amazing about the way that we get this is that it really speaks to the fantasy genre as a whole, right? And that when you're writing a world, a full world in fantasy, you have the opportunity to play out so many stories and like across the board. And so being able to, and that's always been like one of my longtime dreams, is just being able to drop into stories like around the world, just like literally like pinpoint this is what's going on right here, and it makes the world seem more real. And I imagine that George R. R. Martin is probably living his best life. He's probably feeling so significantly like he gets to go play with the characters that he said are his favorite. And I do think that I mean, and I want to talk about the stories as a whole eventually, but like I think appreciate so much the way that we're able to spend so much time. And like, it's like a span of what, 3 days, 4 days of just having that experience with him. And you're right. He's struggling, and like, he thinks he's stupid, and he thinks that he has all of these things. And then you watch him not be those things. And the, you know, it's like you mentioned Last of Us, and like, that's about, you know, Joel and I forget
Ellie
entirely. Like in sort of like the father-daughter, you know,
yeah
quote, relationship. And then we have a very similar sort of mentorship that's occurring between Knight and Squire. And the kid that plays Egg, he's fantastic. He does such a good job, because usually I have this thing about the father-daughter thing that's happening in a few films lately. And to me, there's so much pressure of the young girl to help the father figure to become a better person. And then we're just talking about things like women's unpaid labor and just women's unrecognized labor, etc. And this is what you're talking about, how when we watch this film, we have this TV show where you're like, it's going against everything that we usually think about. I'm like, it's so refreshing. It's just like, oh, there's a man and there's a boy, and they're figuring out their like knighthood and their masculinity and their honor and all of that shit together. And good for them. Good for them for doing that. And I'm actually enjoying it happen. And I think maybe that was the biggest surprise. I was like, wow, I'm watching this male story and I'm loving it. I'm happy with it. And it shouldn't be a surprise, because I mean, that's a lot of Game of Thrones is there's so many male-centered stories. But I mean, watching Dany and watching Arya and Sansa and all of them at the same time made it more complete for me. But for this one, as much as it was missing, and we're going to talk about what was missing, I loved their ability to sort of be that mentorship space and still have it be healthy but not healthy at the same time.
yeah
I don't know. Yeah.
well, I think that idea of like, you know, let's just pull in Joel and Ellie right now, when Joel is like, you know, one day when you have a kid of your own, I hope you do a little bit better than me. And this idea of like what Dunk has learned from Sir Arlen, you know, and how he wants to do better than that for Egg. And his inability in the very beginning, right? The very first episode, unbeknownst to him, right? Like throws this kid like a copper, and he's like, I know you're gonna pick it up when I leave. Meanwhile, Egg is not fiending for money, right? Like, so he's not what he's desperate for, what Egg is desperate for, is life experience that he knows that he's not going to get, an interest in the world in a way that, you know, he's got a brother, Darren the drunk, so, which is who he's hanging out with right now. He's like, Darren the dreaming drunk over here, okay? Which, like, no one wants a Targaryen dream, so we're gonna just ignore him. I'm gonna shave my head because I don't want to look like my oldest brother, who is, you know, Aryan Brightflame, who thinks he's a dragon embodied. And then my other brother, you know, Aemon, is off in the Citadel. Like, he doesn't have an experience and with masculinity or with role models in any capacity. His mother's dead, and his father is absent because he's got other stuff going on. So, you know, he obviously has a relationship with Baelor, which we see, but how often do they get to interact? We don't really know. And so, like, he sees something in Dunk, whether, you know, Dunk wants to admit that or not, whether he's too thick to get it or not. Like, Egg sees something in him right away that he says, I could learn something from him. I want to be his squire. I mostly want to be a squire because I just want to get to Ashford Meadow and go to the tourney. But as their relationship develops, right, you see how deep and important it is for them. And I do really think, despite the fact that I am God's #1 practicing misandrist, right? Like, I just have really been enamored with these stories recently because I'm also covering Exo Kitty right now. And season 2 is like a lot around like the father-son relationship, despite the fact that like Kitty is a girl and she's our main character. But and I'm also covering, you know, Boys of Tommen, which really dives into like how the patriarchy has influenced young men. And they're not my favorite stories to look at, and they're certainly not my favorite stories to tell, but I do think it's critical, especially when we're looking at things from this feminist lens of like, well, how do things disintegrate to the point where we see this relationship between Egg and Dunk and we're like, that's how it should look. That's two people figuring out like how these things should look, where it's like so much more organic, I think, for women. Not always, but and sometimes those stories can be interesting too, but you tend to find like a mother-daughter relationship or those type of stories just have different threads because the emotional connecting piece is often what comes easiest. So they're often examining why or where the disconnect comes or generational stuff, or and this is just very different. It's just two people who need somebody and who are examining integrity. And I think stories about integrity are really critical. And it led me to think a lot about Game of Thrones. And I was like, well, when I'm thinking about these other characters, because spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones or you haven't seen House of the Dragon, we're probably going to talk about both. But, you know, we're about to go into season 3 of House of the Dragon, where we see this character, Rhaenyra, the Realm's Delight, who we've been, you know, following Emma Darcy. They are incredible, like just the best. And we're about to watch her character do a Danny, take a Danny spin. And, you know, Game of Thrones gives us a lot of, like, as a universe, I think gives us a lot of really strong women that make a lot of really bad choices to the point where they're no longer likable characters, even if they're enjoyable to watch. And the only time I think that that has maybe across Thrones history, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, I think is with Brienne, and that's who she's descended from. She's descended from Dunk, right? So this like amazing tie between these two characters who are so rooted in their integrity. And what I went back and did today while I was thinking about it, I was like, I'm pretty sure the episode that she gets knighted is called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So I went and watched that episode, and that's the title, is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And when Dunk is getting knighted, metaphorically speaking,
I was like, oh.
when he's going through his, you know, he doesn't want to knight Raymond Fossaway because, as we discover more overtly in the show, more subtly in the book, that it's not directly said in the book, but it's very largely implied. It's definitely more directly stated by the last episode of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But in that episode, it's in the name of the mother. So it's not these other two, you know, in the name of the warrior, I charge you with bravery, or in the name of the father, I charge you to be just. It's in the name of the mother, I charge you to defend. In Game of Thrones, it's just the innocent, but in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it's the young and innocent. And I just found that correlation between these two episodes, that like Brienne is knighted sort of in the energy of Dunk, and Dunk is knighted in the name of the mother to defend the innocent, to defend the young. And that is what brings him to this place in the first place, because of Tanzel Too Tall, the only woman named in the entire series.
Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't know that. And that's so important, I think, because that's the energy that Dunk brings, right? And it's not,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say a mothering energy because it has so much, that's such a problem on so many levels, like to say, but I do that, you know, maybe it's not, let's actually, let's think about that, right? Because if we're talking about male integrity and care, right, we're not talking about motherhood. But when we're talking about motherhood, we are talking about integrity and care. So Dunk's pursuance of integrity is something that is abnormal in the Game of Thrones in a lot of ways, right? And Brienne is probably one of the only ones in the original series that is actually pursuing integrity, other than Jon Snow. But then he goes way too overboard. That's a whole other thing, right? He has his whole heroes.
I don't want to.
He's got a lot going on. Like Dunk has this. Yeah, I really wonder at the way that we present integrity in different genders, right? And that if Dunk was a woman, he would be perceived as mothering Egg in a lot of ways, right? Because he's taking care of him, he's teaching him, etc., which is usually shown as being a more mothering experience. But I don't know. I do find it interesting to think about the ways that he teaches Egg, and the way that he wants to be different from his own knight, right? Is that he doesn't hit Egg. He threatens it over and over and over again. Is that you should get hit upside the head for that, right? Over and over again. And he had gotten hit so many times, but it was a very clear, like, breaking of generational trauma in that space, you know? So I think that there's still an emotional play that's happening. They are still talking about emotions, but men's emotions, and in a way that's very heteronormative, I think, and it's very restrained in what masculinity is. But I think that the way that they've developed so many male characters in that one television show shows actually our ability to have some spectrum of male characters, right? And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but but I think that this integrity conversation is important, right? Because I mean, you said to me, and I said that, you know, Game of Thrones is mostly violence, and you said no. In this case, this is an integrity story, and I've been thinking about that for weeks now, because of what that means to have integrity as like the central emotion, honestly, or even mental state that we're focusing on. But I do wonder if it was Brienne. Let's say we put Brienne in that exact series and it was her instead of Dunk, right? And let's say Egg's a girl. Let's say that, and we have this. What are we doing? That whole show we were talking about her gender. The whole show we're gonna say, okay, well, she can't be a knight because of this, and blah blah blah. And Dunk gets the chance to just be talking about integrity, right? That he's there because he wants to protect the young and the innocent. And then she would have been there to prove herself against her gender. And now I feel like we've skipped forward to all the other things that I want to talk about, but I think that that's like such an interesting, like, if you want to compare the two, I think it's so important that we have to compare the way that their stories would have played out if Dunk was a girl, specifically Brienne, or any other integrity-based woman, because it changes how the story gets told. But that doesn't mean I don't love Dunk's story. It's such a hard, like you said, like, we're sitting in this weird space where in which it's like I want to talk about it, but also it was a great show. I loved it. And I love Dunk. I think he's a great character.
Yeah. I mean, I think we do know how Brienne's story plays out. We know that she was not knighted up until the second penultimate episode of Game of Thrones, because women can't be knighted. Well, women can sit on the throne, or they certainly can fight for it, or they can pull strings behind it, but they can't be knighted. And I think that we do have this comp because her relationship with Sansa, I think, would be very similar. The idea that she, you know, we meet Brienne very early in her allegiances to Catelyn. Catelyn dies, she takes a vow, she brings that vow and sees it through. By the time we get to the point where she's being knighted, even if you back it up just before that, to the point where she's defending Jaime's honor in front of Dany, and Sansa and Jon are there as counsel. You know, Tyrion as her Dany's hand is like, I have something to say here. I don't want my brother to get killed, right? Like, trying to like rectify the situation. And Sansa, when Brienne stands up and says, he lost his hand for me. And when we think about Jaime and he's like, I was that hand, I think that by the time Brienne is vouching for him, we have such an investment in her integrity as a character that it means something, right? So
Sure, yeah.
When we see these two characters, right? Like, when you see somebody, and we have had much more time with Brienne than we've had with Dunk, but like, by the time that you get to the point where Arian's like, you're willing to throw your life away for this whore, you're like, yeah, I am. Because we know that it doesn't matter whether he's lied about it or not, that the oath and what it means to be a knight, and that this idea of integrity, you know, is actually an integrity versus cowardice, right? Because Dunk is willing to go and do a normal trial by combat, which would have just been between him and Arian. Arian's the fucking coward that needs to round up 7 other men to go fight with him because he doesn't want to die. And he knows that Dunk's got like 1,000 feet on him. So you're looking at these story, the base of the story, you know, to me wasn't about violence, but the fact that the threat of someone's masculinity, particularly when it comes to these Targaryen men who, you know, at this point in time, we're somewhere like 80-ish years or so after a House of the Dragon, so there's no dragons. They're Targaryens without dragons, so what's the point? You say you're men that are close to God, but it's a little bit different when somebody's riding into battle on a freaking dragon back versus like, well, we have dragons on our banners. Like, great. I don't know. The Fossaways changed theirs from red to green. Like, you can do anything that you want. Who cares? So it's a little bit different, right? And I think it's this idea of like, well, what happens when somebody's masculinity is threatened, and what happens when the threat of that thing comes from defending the honor of a woman? Like, it's just really interesting storytelling, even though women aren't centered really at all in this story. And a few changes that I thought were really interesting from the book, particularly the fact that like Lord Ashford's daughter has a name in the show. She's not named at all in the book. She's just, it's just her name day. It's just, we're there to celebrate her, whoever she is. She's got one line in the show and her name is Gwyn. So like we get a little bit from her. You know, and I think it's okay that like not all stories have to revolve around women and that we can enjoy them. But I think it's interesting the way that women are framed across the spectrum of the 6 episodes, because the story is driven a lot. The main plot point is driven forward by Tanzell. And when we leave our characters, they're headed to Dorne to go find Tanzell. So, you know, the last chunk of the season is driven so much by somebody who gets really not a lot of screen time. I went to go check today, like the IMDb. I was like, what was the name of this other prostitute? Red. Like, what's her name?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is Red.
I was like, is it Red? Could have been.
And which I was interested about for other reasons, novel related, but okay, whatever. We don't have to go that far down into the A Night of Seven Kingdoms rabbit hole. She's not even listed on the main page. And you want to know what really fucking pissed me off? A character that comes in season 2 is listed on the page.
Damn.
And I was like, we haven't even gotten screen time with this guy yet.
I think that's this is we'll get into now. I think what I'm mad about.
Okay.
I think because that's the great segue for it, because it's infuriating and it sucks because, and it's so funny because I really wonder, because this is the second podcast I've done about Game of Thrones, right? And I did my first one originally on Game of Thrones, the original series. And I wrote my master's thesis on Game of Thrones because I was that mad. And the problem is how much love I have for this series, for Westeros. Is one of my favorite places that doesn't exist, right? The frustration that I have with these stories is twofold. First and foremost, we have women that are either prostitutes or maidens in distress. And we have that. That's exactly the 2 female characters we have, and the daughter. Okay, so we have children, right? And then we have prostitutes, whores, however you want to call it, right? And then we have the love interest. And you're right, she drives the story. If she didn't exist, Dunk would not have gotten into anything that happened after episode 2, right? And this placement of women in these two narratives is so frustrating to me, especially so because this show had, to me, some of the best narratives and character development of different types of masculinity that I've seen in a very, very long time, other than the original Game of Thrones, right? I mean, you see so many different characters, right? But in 6 episodes, we have men who are strong, who are brave, who are cowardly, who are drunk, who are flamboyant, etc., 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 right? We have such a long list, and they're emotional. We have emotional experiences happening, right? We have men crying, hugging, like fatherly love, fatherly guidance. We have men. I mean, the fact that, and I should have a list of characters' name in front of me, because in my head I just have like their pictures, and I'm like, you know, Duncan, this guy, and he hugs this guy. But like the intimacy of the male friendships and relationships is so obvious. And that's why I think I enjoyed it so much, because it wasn't just rough and tough masculinity, where in which there was no connection and there was no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I'm like, well, that's fantastic. But we still only have 2 female characters, and they're still in the same places that we always have women in fantasy. And that's like a very broad statement. But generally, we have women who are either in a place that we can go to, right? She is a whore, so you can go to and get what you need from her, right? Or she is the love interest, and she is this prize. You're collecting her. And Dunk literally ends the season going to collect her. And so it's so difficult for me, because like it's almost like they're like sprinkled in to just be like, oh, don't worry, this isn't just a boys show. We have girls in the boys show. And I always struggle with this because is it a boys show? Like, do we get to a point where we're sitting here and we're complaining about this, or I shouldn't say we're complaining, we're discussing this, right? And maybe the answer is, oh, well, that show's for boys. Like, at what point do I have to be like, well, actually, no, the show is for everybody, and you should be recognizing how much women love fantasy? Or is it just going to be, well, if you have enough money and you're producing fantasy, it's for boys and they're the ones that are going to pay for it? So I always get so frustrated with this because it feels like this could have had, I don't know, maybe it couldn't have. Maybe the story is so small, like maybe it couldn't have. But like, think of House of Dragons. Think of that show, and we have two most powerful, well created women. I say, okay, well then is that the girl show? Is that our girl show? We get House of Dragons. They get the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and then we can't discuss it, right? But we see so much of wow. See, this is I haven't watched House of Dragons since the last. I can't remember his name. Rhaenyra's husband.
Daemon.
Thank you,
Daemon.
Obviously, right? But we see so much of him. I could go on the same thread for like an hour, right? But at what point do we say that we're allowed to put female stories at the same time as male stories and not have this concern that one's going to drown the other out, right? Because men's stories drown women's stories out all the time, but it seems to be this concern that if I flesh out one character just a little bit more, then it's going to be a women's story. I'm going to stop. I'm going to let you put your thoughts in, because like I said, I could just keep going on this like one thread for the next hour.
I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I want to ask you a question. Like, why do you love Westeros? That's like a really interesting thing for me, that you're like, this is one of my favorite worlds. I love to just drop into it. So like, I think that's going to help me formulate what I want to say next. So tell me why you like the series, or not the series. Why do you like the world? Because the series and the world are two different things.
So, I mean, I started on fantasy when I was like 8 or 9 with The Hobbit. I started Tolkien immediately. And then the Lord of the Rings, and that was my intro. My mom did that for me, and I'll always be grateful to her for that, because that was the start of my whole life, right? In terms of fantasy and love of reading. And then I just started reading other small things. And when I got to Game of Thrones, it was the first time I think that I read something that substantial. I mean, I spent my childhood, I read like Redwall, and I read all of Tamora Pierce's books, all of these like bigger worlds, but that were built for the children or young adults. And I think Game of Thrones, and I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Game of Thrones was the first adult series that I read that had the biggest world. And if you give me a world that's not this one, and it has dragons in it, you will never pull me out of that world. So there's so much love for that there. And I also, and as much as I do complain about how Game of Thrones functions, there are some incredible female characters in there that you can just hook right into. And Arya will always be one of my favorite characters of all time. And her in the book, her journey in the book is one of my favorites. And Catelyn Stark, spoiler alert, after she dies, when she comes on back,
this is my
storyline that I want more than anything. And
this is my biggest grievance.
I want that so bad. Lady Stoneheart, I want to know what she's doing. I want to know. So like for Game of Thrones and for Westeros specifically, I think the extent of it and the dragons, and that I did actually see female stories, women's stories in a world for adults, I think it just got me hooked in. And then I was gone. And then the TV show came out, and then that you can't get me back out of it. So it's up there with Middle Earth for me. It just is.
Okay.
And I think it's because, and this is so interesting, I think I have, this is going to be so weird to say, I think I have male taste in fantasy, because I read, Game of Thrones is my favorite. I love Lord of the Rings. Brandon Sanderson is one of my top authors of all time. Patrick Rothfuss, like Scott.
So
like, I'm like listing off all of these male dominated worlds, and then I'm mad about them, but I'm like, I also could just go read more women, which I do. Don't ever think I don't read women, because I do constantly. But those are my favorite worlds. So I'm going to stop, because I feel like you're like, I have a list, and now I feel like I've gotten in trouble now.
No. Okay, so I came into this year, you were like the first person I texted. I was like, I am going to endeavor on my token scholarship this year, because like I feel like so many people, like you're like the bajillionth person now that has said this, where a lot of people I feel like were introduced to Tolkien through their parents. I had a young mom. I was introduced to a lot of other stuff. Like, I was the only one watching Titanic at 6.
Yeah.
I my mom was just interested in different things. My mom's not interested in this stuff.
Yeah.
So I was never going to be introduced to this through either one of my parents because my dad's not interested in it either. So I never got into I never read, this is also on my list for this year, I never read Narnia. I've never read any, outside of Harry Potter, I've never read the kid fantasy. I've never did Tolkien. I'm struggling my way through The Hobbit right now. I'm I have to listen to the audiobook. It's, you know what? Okay, so this is a separate tangent, then I'll come back. But it feels to me like a recounting of an experience that he had, and I wish that that's just how he wrote it. I feel like he went to Middle Earth. I'm not joking. I'm being so fucking for real right now. This man went to fucking Middle Earth and came back and wrote about it, and it became a series because that's the way that he has written The Hobbit is it's almost at certain pieces academic. And by the way, this group of people does this sort of thing, and you're like, this is irrelevant to the plot, but fine, okay, give it to me. You told me
Okay, so one of my friends. I'm probably gonna. I hopefully I don't lose your listeners from this. But one of my friends forced me to read ACOTAR. So
okay.
It's not for me. And it's so funny because what you're saying is the other side of fantasy. Yes, tell me who all of these people are. No, it's not about the plot, it's the world building. And
yeah,
if you read fantasy from an ACOTAR starting point, it changes things.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that another time if we want to, but go ahead.
It's really fascinating. This is why we are going to start a podcast.
Right, yeah.
Because then we can go through all of these things together, because you told me not to start with The Hobbit, and I just didn't listen, so I've shot myself in the foot here.
The Hobbit is it's like a nostalgia that you get after Lord of the Rings. That's what it feels like. But
okay.
I did start with The Hobbit too, but I was much younger, so it's very different.
I mean, I read The Hobbit when I was in middle school, so I have read it before, but I had somebody read it to me, I guess. It was like a class read, my teacher would read it in between stuff. So I'm okay, I need to build it out. But it's so funny that you also say Brandon Sanderson, because I was like, fine, I'll do Mistborn this year. I started reading Mistborn and I was like, I simply cannot get through this. I was like, I'm having a bad reading year. I think it's just me. I paused because I was like, I really think I need to dissect this with other people. So maybe that's somewhere we can start, because I was like, I really feel like I need to dissect it with other people, because I was about 30% in and I was like, I feel like this is gonna get good. I just simply can't stand this female main character right now. By 30%. I was like, I need to just shift gears. So anyway, I struggle a lot with fantasy written by men. I do. Which is also so funny because Tress of the Emerald Sea is one of my favorite books. But I don't know. Anyway, whatever. I say all that because, to come back to my point of asking, Westeros is not a world that I am excited to be in. So when House of the Dragon, I had read A Song of Ice and Fire, I had read the Duncan Egg novels. I simply could not have been less bothered to read Fire and Ash. And I have now since read it, but at the time I was just like, I'm done. I need a fucking break from this world. Now, I will also say the thing that is most interesting to me about Game of Thrones is this War of Roses comp, because I love history and I love the War of Roses. So when I'm reading Game of Thrones, I like the history pieces of things. I think on a second read, I was more invested in the characters than I was the first time around. The first time around, I was like, that's King Louis and that's his mom. And here's this, that's all I could do.
Okay, yeah.
So when House of the Dragon was being announced, I was like, it was another thing, the Game of Thrones cultural zeitgeist, it kind of brushes me over. I'm like, who wants to be back in Westeros? I'm sorry. I'm like, the world fucking sucks. Who the fuck wants to be in this gory, depressing, awful place? If you're more Middle Earth, I'm like, okay, at least when you put on Middle Earth ambiance, it's a nice little YouTube video. When you're Game of Thrones ambiance, it's dark, it's gloomy.
I'm gonna make this worse. So my favorite episode in the entirety of Game of Thrones is the Battle of the Bastards.
Me too.
the goriest episode that there is, and it's dark and it's dirty and it's awful and it's wonderful. It's so well filmed. It's so well, all of it's fantastic. But Westeros, it's not dirty, grimy, gross, and sad. It is, but it's the strength of the North. I think maybe it's just because I'm from New England. The strength of the North, like that's what that feeling is. And I don't know. I don't know why though. I love Westeros not as much as I love Middle Earth. I would take Middle Earth over Westeros any day of the like. There's no question there. I don't know, Julia. I think it's the dragons.
Okay.
I think that's.
I can get behind that. I too love a dragon.
But I hear you, and yes, it is a world written by men, and it is interesting how many of my favorite fantasies are written by men, and I don't know how much there's. The big thing to say about that is that we don't publish enough women, so that's a big thing. But I think I'm a writer too. I'm a writer, and I have my own world that I'm building, and so to me, I love world building. And it doesn't matter who's doing it. I want to see what new combinations that somebody has made in their brain from all of the things that we all see. We all get to see the same things, but somebody has some special perspective on it where in which they've created a different type of magic. And so world building to me is actual magic. And I say this all the time. I say the biggest regrets or grief in my life is that I can never have a dragon and I can never be magic. And so being able to write stories, to build worlds, like that's magic to me. So I think to me, there's so much of it is the appreciation of the world building more so than it is anything else. And also, I just think I'm a giant nerd. So I think that's like the cherry on top.
No, me too. But I hear you and I love that. And I can't wait to read whatever you're writing because having attended your annual Halloween party, I know that you know how to build a world. So sadly, everyone listening will have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's true. I know that you do this really well, and I'm not surprised that that's what intrigues you about, but I think also when we're looking at genre, especially fantasy or sci-fi, these were male dominated fields for a long time. And I think now with this rise of romantasy, which is why I think people are so enamored with stories like ACOTAR, even though she just announced another 2 books, and I'm like, I don't have it in me. I'm sorry. I just don't. I simply just don't. I think it was good as a trilogy and it should have existed that way. Anyway, that's my own opinion, but I'm sure the internet will come for my throat.
Sure, yes. Yeah, no, I was like, should I even say the word ACOTAR? Yeah, whatever.
No, it's fine. But that's why I think there's a reason why I think, ACOTAR has hit groups of women and book talk the way that it has, because there's really not, what's the comp? Where are the female fantasy writers? Where are the women that are doing this? So I think that these are like really interesting questions, but as a woman looking at Westeros, have been consistently like, ugh, I don't want to get back into it. And, the thing that I actually love most about House of the Dragon is that the gore of the show is canonically feminine. So you've got Rhaenyra post childbirth, bleeding, walking up the stairs with her baby who's blood covered. I find that to be wonderful, to be honest, to be wonderful, and to not also like chalk childbirth up to be this like beautiful, amazing, life changing, it's so miraculous, like it is, and it's also gory and tough, and it's a battlefield of its own. And how many women we've seen in this show or in other similar, medieval type stories of women being lost to childbirth, because that's like how taxing it is.
House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
First, and I was mad from day one, from minute one.
Fridged.
Like, we just killed a mom immediately. Immediately, we just said childbirth, death immediately, and I was so fucking mad about it. But you're right. There's the way that they portrayed it later. It is feminine and it's very. How did you just put it? It's feminine gore in some way. Something like that. And I think that that's so, because we see blood more than any man ever.
Once a month.
Blood. So I think that there's such a glorification of the way that men can draw blood, that there's not enough of a representation of how we handle it regularly, or how we are immersed in it every part of our of our lives if we're menstruating, right? And so I think I like that you just said that. I think that's really, but I lost my train of thought, so continue. I wanted to go back briefly to the women writing fantasy, Samantha Shannon. And
okay, great.
are two who I would immediately shout out as who are fantastic. Samantha and Shannon does the full-fledged world building, dragons and everything. And N.K. Jemisin is my favorite author of all time. But she does, it's fantasy. It's kind of, I wouldn't call it sci-fi, but it's not.
I like
it's not
that.
medieval,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, sure.
But I do think there needs to be an allowance for the way that women build worlds and to see it differently. Yeah. And that's a whole other podcast. We'll stop there.
Yeah.
Because I know that was just this was the start of one of your questions before you wanted to say 1,000 other things.
Yeah. Well, I just think that, the show does, I think what the show aims to accomplish, it achieves. But I think when you're looking at it from this lens of feminism and you see a political woman, perhaps if that's what Tanzel is doing, which I would like to believe that she is. This is a woman after my heart.
I was going to say, do you think that play, the puppet, the performance, do you think it was a political statement?
Yeah.
Because you want
yeah, I do.
Because you think that it was purpose, like that it is.
I think it makes for more interesting storytelling.
Yeah. But why couldn't we have punched that up then? Why couldn't we have spent more time with that? Why couldn't we have made it purposeful? Because it was not purposeful. There was no intention behind it.
I think it makes for more interesting storytelling if Tanzel and her uncle and their puppets have something to say about the dragon. This group of people who have been in power. And when you're in a story so rooted in common folk, which this is, you could go back to the very first episode where unnamed woman in the inn, right? Innkeeper, not Egg's mother, right? It says I've never known a joust to change the price of eggs or something like that. I've never known a knight to change the price of eggs. They don't care about this. Tanzel and her uncle, who are these traveling artists with their own craft, in my headcanon, right. are interested in I think in raising rebellion. I don't think it's that far, but I think they are interested in some sort of political commentary, which is to say why are we, if we're concerned about the price of eggs, right? Why are these people in charge?
And that could be in Westeros or right here in the US.
Yeah. And I think that's the point, right? This is a piece of political commentary that I think that they're saying or trying to say. And so whether they want to use plausible deniability or not, you could see why somebody who feels that they are the embodied dragon gets upset at this. And then you can see how somebody like Dunk, who takes the oath of the mother, right? Of all the oaths that he has or has not taken, right? But the oath of the mother, in the name of the mother, I will defend the young and innocent. That means something to him. That is why he wants to be a knight. I want to go and defend people who are not capable of doing so themselves. I'm willing to lay my body on the line for causes that I believe in. And this is something that they say, I don't know if they say it in the TV show, but they say it in the book where Sir Arlen is of all the knights, the hedge knight is the one who takes the oath the most seriously, because we only invest in the causes that we believe in. We will only go and fight for the things that we believe to be true. So even before we get to this story with Dunk, when you hear that from Sir Arlen, you are already hearing a story about integrity. And I think it's just a question of but why do stories about integrity and honor and righteousness, particularly in this world, belong to men?
I think we can use
Tanzel. Yeah, Tanzel too tall.
Right.
Not too tall for me.
We can use her storyline, I think, to answer that question, right? Because let's say that you're right, and I agree with you that it was a political statement in one small fashion or another, right? Maybe she just simply, the puppeteers, that was their intention. She's standing up for something that she believes in. She's positioned in some way as someone who has integrity enough so to stand up to authoritarianism or whatever it is you want to call the Targaryens. And could be easily perceived as somebody who is calling out something that's wrong, right? But she isn't given any capacity to pursue that. And so it seems like, and this is going to be from my own side of things, from my own education, right? But it seems like there's this concern that giving women too much narratives of things like integrity results in things like what people might call loud feminism. The idea of women screaming, yelling, being angry, being loud is something that needs to be removed from fantasy and from media, right? And so if we think about think about Dany. Dany was the last 2 seasons excluded, the ultimate feminist in a lot of ways. And she was the mother feminist at the same time. And she had integrity.
Is that before or after she decimated King's Landing?
She can do no wrong, baby. But I think that the failure to give women integrity, I think, is because I don't think that we have the capacity to understand women as being able to take up the defense of the world. And this is a long-standing issue in sexism as a whole, right? Is that women's position is the protection of the household, and men's position is the protection of the state and the government and the world. And it seems like this narrative is what's sustaining, and it sustains throughout fantasy. And for anybody listening, this is what I work on, right? Is the ways that we see narratives reflecting our philosophical issues. And I think that if we give women integrity and the ability to defend the world, then we're allowing for that male narrative to be sort of given up or drowned down away, right? Take Brienne. Brienne is literally that. She could easily be the protector of the realm. Yes, her entire goal is for Catelyn, and that is the sort of her intention, but she does it on purpose, and she does it because that's her oath. And oaths are integrity. And so I think we are uncomfortable with the idea of having a female character that's going to be able to just focus on the state. Because if she's not mothering, or she's not being reflected as taking care of the household in whatever fashion that is, then there's a resistance against what it is that character's doing, right? And we see it in Rings of Power. Did you watch Rings of Power? It's okay.
I'm getting to my token scholarship. I'm doing it, okay? It's coming this year.
But we see it with Galadriel. She's Galadriel, and she is a defender. She's a fighter, and she represents the defense of the realm, and we'll use those terms. It's not actual. The defense of Middle Earth, right? And she does as such without being a mother ever at all, right? And she's not being perceived as being a family-based person. And everybody on the internet fucking hated it. They were angry because all of a sudden she seemed too perfect. That's what they said, that she seemed infallible, that she was operating in a way that made it seem like she wasn't a real person, which is incredible because she's an elf. First of all, high elves, like, they're not. So
Literally not a person, so.
So step one. And then you have Elrond operating at the same exact time as her, doing the same exact things with no commentary as to him not seeming like a real person or not. So what I'm coming around to here is this idea is that if we give women a narrative of integrity and a narrative of maintaining honor in a system, in any system, that what we're doing is we're giving a character that seems unrecognizable, because if she's not over emotional and if she's not caring solely for a family sort of scenario, then she's seen as being somehow not a real person. And the theoretical concept behind that is long and overreaching. And if you're really interested, we can read my stuff, right? But like, I think that that's where the failure comes in, is that it would be heavily resisted if we just allowed a woman to be in Dunk's character the whole time. I don't think it would be accepted as something that people would watch. I don't think it would go well.
I wish I had a counter argument. No, I think it's true, right? Because that stand-in could have been Tanzelle. Okay, we're like 12-ish years maybe after the Blackfire Rebellion, so House Targaryen's at war with itself.
We have opportunity. Yes.
So if we took this whole story from Tanzelle's point of view as somebody who has something to say and has an oath that she would like to keep, or even if you go to Brienne, I mean, I don't want to say what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, okay? Is Brienne interesting as a character without Jaime as the reflection?
I think so. I love Brienne.
I do too.
But the entire conflict with Jaime is a fascinating thing. And when it was written, when it was in popularity, having a bigger woman in perceived as more masculine woman being feminized and being a love interest was interesting enough in itself, right? And love interest, I use that very loosely, right? But eventually. And I think Brienne was a narrative point for Jaime and not the other way around. Jaime needed to stop being an arrogant asshole. And so they gave him Brienne. for a good reason, because she was going to do it, because she came with integrity and honor and showed him who it was that he was supposed to be. But where's the labor? Again, this is the labor that I was talking about between, when they have, Joel and Ellie, when you set that up, when you have women operating in the position where they're teaching men how to be good people, and thank goodness I'm gay. So I don't have to do that in real life. But like that narrative, I think, sustains other things too, and that men can only be good and can only pursue integrity or whatever, or be not like Jamie, if they have somebody that's showing them the way, that's a woman that's able to also fall in love with them. So it's a complicated narrative, I think. Yeah, Brienne's a secondary character, and would she be interesting without Jamie? I don't think she's meant to be, and I think we just love her because of who she is, and because of the actress. I love her anyway.
Yeah. Yes. When she popped up in Severance, do you watch Severance?
I was so excited. Yes, I watched Severance. That is one of the best TV shows that's been made in a long time. And I was so excited. And the fact that she was just with the goats, I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
This is life.
This is all I needed.
I was like, I could just now see Severance is a world I find fascinating. Another world I do not want to be in, but
no, never. But so well written, excellent.
Yeah, I don't know. I really did enjoy it. I really did love from start to finish. I loved the music. I loved the way it was filmed. I loved the battle, the fact that the battle was like strictly in Dunk's POV. I thought the relationship between Dunk and Egg was phenomenal. I think the last thing, well, no. I have two more little points. Do you find, first of all, you were like, thank God I'm gay, and I was like, oh, I wish I was gayer. It's like I'm like only gay on like 50% of my mom's side, so it's like I need like the other 50%. Do you feel that the relationship with Lionel Baratheon, played by Daniel Ing, who was in one of my favorite TV shows, Lovesick. I feel like everyone should watch that show. Like really British, but like super amazing. Do you feel like the relationship between Dunk and Lionel Baratheon is queer coded at all?
Oh my God, no.
I do.
That's just the most you thing. No.
Is this just my inner desires? I'm sweating. I'm like, that when they were dancing together, and his slutty little earring, and he sticks his tongue out at him, and I was like, you're gay. Just say it. You don't need to do all this to say you're gay. You can just be gay. Wait, I know they can in Westeros. No, for Lionel Baratheon. Lionel Baratheon. No, 100%. But my headcanon is Lionel Baratheon is gay as fuck, and he's down for Dunk.
100%. No, that, yes. I thought you meant the relationship between them. No. But no, him, yes. Oh, for sure. And I think that was the intention.
I simply don't think Dunk, Dunk the Lunk, in the book they say, thick as a castle wall and slow as an oryx. So Dunku is this like canonically in the novels not smart person, much smarter in the TV show than they like. He's young in the book too. He's also 16. He's like in his 30s or something. The changes that they make are significant. I don't think Dunk is quite clever enough to realize that Lionel Baratheon is, by the end of the time that we get with them on this other podcast that I listened to, so I don't want to like rip them off, but this is what I was thinking too. So it was like my original thought, and then they said it on this podcast, House of R, which we were talking about a little bit earlier, where she was like, do you want to come to the cottage with me? And I was like, that's what I was thinking too. And I don't know if it's just because literally I have two brain cells and it's Connor's Story and Hudson Williams, but fine. So I wanted to know what you thought about that, because I thought it was very queer coded, and I also I also really enjoyed that piece of it as well, because I was like really trying to rack my brain, and I was like, oh, another Baratheon. Can't think of his name. Also gay.
Renly. Yes.
Yes, Renly. Yes. Yeah, just not even like, oh, a little gay, just like like really gay. Yeah. So it runs in the Baratheon line is basically what I'm saying.
That's what I said. I was like, oh, okay. No, I mean, it was definitely queer coded, and I think that I wish it could have been openly queer coded. But if I'm just openly queer, but every gay person in Game of Thrones gets murdered. So I'm also just happy that he got to live in happiness. So
me and you, we don't. And you're fiending to get to Westeros.
Okay, but
well, to be fair, they're It doesn't matter. We would just position ourselves as whores in this lifetime, and we'd be sleeping with each other, and men would pay us for it. It would be great. So that's actually my dream. Maybe I do want to go to Westeros.
I would probably have to go out with the Greyjoys because Theon's sister, whose name is also escaping me right now, she's gay, and she was the only gay one that survived. So good for her. She did it, and
she's like a masked lesbian though.
Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, like I'm too femme, I think. Hence the name of my podcast, but like I'm way too femme. I think
my hair if it means that I get to be leader of the Benny house.
I was also kind of disappointed. I feel like Arya should be queer.
I agree. She was young,
and then she was like, and then then Arya as a virgin is like Podrick, who, by the way, I think is, I could be wrong about this, but I think is related to Sir Arlen. So well endowed.
Interesting.
You know, of the penny tree. Okay.
It was wild though, because we were both like, I need to Google this right now. Like, either this man has something happen.
No, it was a prosthetic. It was a prosthetic penis.
Which also could be a whole other conversation as to why that was a necessary addition. Was that in the book that he was well endowed?
No, because you don't really meet him in the same way. You get a lot through flashbacks.
So I think that's so interesting as to why, and that's why I'm like, it's a boys show, because they're like, you know what we should do? We should give him a massive, yeah. I
saw that and I was having stomach trauma. I was like, that is when people say rearrange your guts. They were talking about Sir Arlen. Okay.
Thank you.
I do. I agree with that. And like, in this subversion of the genre, it's very slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
And how, like, is that traditionally masculine, you know, as like Charlie Chaplin, slapstick.
Yeah.
Damsel on the train tracks. Oh no, right? Like, you know, so we have like episode 1, like the Game of Thrones intro, like really starts to come in, and then you have Dunk taking a massive shit, which is just like, and I like literally by the time I got there, I literally rolled my eyes and I was like, there's the Game of Thronesian of it all. Like, here's the disgustingness of it.
I almost lost Kat right there in that minute. My wife, yes.
So we open then, I don't know if that's episode 2, that it opens with like Sir Arlen's like huge ginormous cock, and you're just like, here's the Thronesian of it all, right? Like, it's that's the gore of it, that's the disgustingness of it. But then I do think that those things are typically masculine. Like, that's why Game of Thrones to me wasn't super interesting as a story, because I'm not interested in this type of fighting. I'm just not. Now, if you're like, let's go to the Ren Fair and watch 2 hot guys joust, fine, okay? That's for entertainment purposes, and you don't need to know anything about that. Like, that's my business and not yours. But I just feel like there is something about Thrones that is very designed to be reaching this masculine audience. And so when you say, like, is this a boys' show? I think it is. And I think the pieces of it that are very feminine go over the heads of men, if I'm being honest. So, like, for example, you've got these 2 prostitutes. Their conversation to me, like, they're talking about, you know, they're talking about getting fucked. They're talking about girlhood and like what it is to be in this like scenario together, and how they take care of each other, and, you know, feel like 2 women who are really girls, or a group of women who are really girls, in the presence of a man. That man has no idea what's happening in the conversation, because so much is happening in a conversation that is silent between women. It's looks, it's body language. It's like, you could tell, like, if Chad comes up to me and Chad starts talking about crypto, and I'm like that little sigh means nothing to him. That's encouragement for Chad. He's like, she's into it. She's breathing. Let's go. But like for
signal.
Yeah, but like for women, we're like, oh, okay, you know. So I find like when shows do women things or feminine things in a way that is supposed to be reaching a feminine audience, to the point where like Dunk leaves that first encounter and he's like, okay, I'll come back later. And he comes back later and they're having this conversation. He's like, must you mock me? Like, why do you have to be like this? But that's how women actually really do talk to each other, is in this, or particularly women who are feminist or women who are girls talk to other women who are girls that are like, I don't know, it's just naturally gonna lean and skew a certain way. And I think that it does do that really well, even to the point where we get to the end of the show And these men, no offense, or actually all the offense in the world, are so fucking stupid that, like,
after a day, a night.
and it's a boy.
It's
Because she
funny.
could say anything at this point. He's green. Better to be green than rotten to the core. It's like rotten and wormy. It's like, you know what green means? Like, green being like new, novice, right? So like, you're so new at this thing, you've probably never had sex before, young Raymond Fossaway, that like she's doing a woman coded thing to Dunk in this moment where she's like, shut the fuck up, don't fucking say anything. And Dunk the Lung, thick as a castle wall, right? Slow as an oryx, is like, okay, well, good for you, Raymond. Like, have fun. I'm gonna go hang out with my buddy my buddy Egg over here. You know, she's the fact that like women in these shows, from Game of Thrones to House of the Dragon to this like one side character, barely named, barely on the IMDb of this show, is able to quite literally sleep her way up through the ranks. Like, and the fact that that's like a femme fatale like use of this, like, it's not maybe to Raymond's detriment, but it is certainly to the benefit of the woman in the scenario, and using the wiles and the gifts that she has in order to be able to get ahead in this world that doesn't have many avenues for women to get ahead. So they're using what they can in her sexuality in this way that she's so comfortable with, that she's able to end this show married to a fucking knight that was a lord of a house. Like, you know, and I do think that the show does these feminine pieces really well, but I don't think that they're overt in the story. And I think that the women talking to women in this show are designed to reach the women audience, and I think much like it is in real life and much how it is in the show, it goes over a conventionally masculine. That's just my take, because I think when you see women having conversations, like, I don't know, I just went to Manhattan over the weekend. I was out with a group of women. I'm watching women at tables with men, and I was watching like girl groups like mine, and I was like, these are very different things that are happening here, because multiple times you can see like a girl look at another girl and that girl make eye contact back, and you're like, they're having a whole fucking conversation that these two jack-offs have no idea what's going on. And I think that the show does that really well. And it makes it farce or satirical, you know, in the name of the show. But I think as a woman watching the show and having been in those conversations multiple times myself, I'm always like, okay, I like that. I like when shows can do that. So I do think it does touch on some things, but then it's just like a question of like, well, then if we're going to make changes, especially the end of the show was drastically different in its adaptation from the novel, which was had remained pretty faithful to the novella for the most part, until we get to the end where there was like a few differences. The main one being Maekar gives Egg and Dunk his blessing.
Yeah, I was reading that. Yeah.
And Maekar has been like said, like the actor who plays him, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, has said like he's not coming back for season 2, which means they set this up to not even be a plot point. I was like, all right, if they're setting that up to be a plot point where Maekar's chasing them through the kingdom and there's going to be repercussions for this or whatever. But they were like, no, we just thought it would be something that's funny. And I actually think that it takes away from the beauty of the ending of that story. And so like, if you're going to make such a drastic change with no repercussions for it coming this season, or I guess maybe it could be other seasons, but at least not in season 2, I would say then why not enhance these stories around the women and make them more interesting? And I don't know if it's just because it's a low budget show, or if it's because there's only 6 episodes, or because they only wanted it to be rooted so deeply in Dunk's POV that they just said they're not part of his POV, so why not? But then it begs like a larger question of like, well, then is this like a larger question around George R.R. Martin and why he's not interested in that story? Why are you interested in Dany? Well, we don't really know how Dany's story pans out in the books. Like, okay, like Jon Snow is still dead in the books, so we have no idea, you know, really how he intended. But intent and what we have received really means nothing when these are when the women that we have gotten over the course of the thread of the 3 different properties are women who are typically falling from grace in some way, or advancing a man's plot and then dying, right? Like Shane. So, I think I would be less disappointed if it was just like a boy show and the girls can watch it. We can have a good time. If they didn't make such big diversions from the ending, then like why not diverge and make these characters more, they, well, by the way, they did from the novella, but then like why not go heavier? Yeah. This is just interesting.
I think it's a good point, and I was surprised, and I think a woman directed a few of the episodes, and we had women in the production team, I think, which was really good. And I think there is a big question to George R. R. Martin as to his approach to women, but it's not abnormal, right? This is not something that I think we can. It's something that we would have to ask every male fantasy writer ever, right? Literally ever. I love all of their worlds, and still I love Tolkien, but my God, like the substance isn't there in the same way.
Yeah.
And I really find it so interesting that your perspective on Red and the ending of her being pregnant and using that to sleep her way up. And I think it's so interesting that you see that as like a pro. To me, it was something that I found so frustrating because it was like this is the only way she can make her way up.
Yeah.
And it's not a like in the world, like you said, like if we're dropped in there, like we're gonna go hoe around and get us to a point where like we're gonna use that because that's what women have used forever in order to get to a certain perspective in a patriarchal society, 1000%. And from that perspective, like I'm on your side. My biggest frustration has always been it's fantasy. You can make it however you want. You can literally make up whatever you want. Why
Yeah.
is it that the only way that women can get ahead is if they're married into it or if they're a whore? Like that's what it always comes back to that, and it's like, but why does it have to be that? And I don't think we're gonna get more. I think we're
No.
gonna be like endlessly unsatisfied by it until we have women like their stories being produced as high fantasy. And I don't know. We're not there yet, I guess. Though I guess I think
Yeah.
Akatar isn't. Are they talking about making that into a film or TV show or something?
So it was picked up and then it was dropped, I think, a couple times. I know that the Empyrean series is getting that's Fourth Wing and Iron Flame and whatnot, which that has dragons. I wouldn't say it's high fantasy though, but I think you may enjoy it for it's a vibe. It's like a vibey book. That's getting adapted on Amazon Prime. I do think Sarah J. Maas has had the best well, that's not true because Night Circus is my favorite book, and I would say it's fantasy, but it's more of like it's not high fantasy. It's like it's a cozy fantasy. There's magic in it, but it's more like magical realism type of deal. But that's by Erin Morgenstern, and I really like the way that she writes women, and I really like the way that she does her worlds. So when we say world building, like pretty much anytime they're like, there's another special edition of Night Circus coming out, which does not happen like all that often, but they just came out with like the folio version of it, and I was like, take my money. I have about 100,000 copies of this book. It's one of my favorite books. Not one of, it is my favorite book. But Sarah J. Maas, I think, does actually do this really well, but I think she does it well not in ACOTAR, but in Throne of Glass. And the way that Throne of Glass develops and the way that it ends and the way that all of those characters, their story feels very complete. The women in the series across the series are strong and interesting and powerful, but I think that is like the best example of it. And I think like ACOTAR and Crescent City, as far as like Sarah J. Maas books, are like num 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 num, like they're popcorn books. They're not designed to be like high fantasy where I guess ACOTAR really is. Crescent City is more of like a urban fantasy, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. It doesn't particularly matter, but like these stories also then have a romantic subplot. In a way that like Game of Thrones or a lot of other male written fantasy doesn't.
But at the same time, that's not necessarily true. Like we have Jon Snow's entire
That's true.
relationship.
Yeah.
And we have, I mean, every male fantasy that I've read has romance. Dunk's story has romance. It's not
Yeah.
long, it's not good, but it's there. And I think when women write fantasy, even if it's as minute as male written fantasy as to have a romance inside of it, it's still targeted as it being that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And like that's what I think is the biggest problem, is that it's like, okay, well, women are going to get published in fantasy if they have enough romance that it can be sold as romantasy, and men will get published in fantasy because they're men and they're writing fantasy. And so it's like it's such a hard, because I always feel like such a wet blanket, like always like, oh well, you don't like romance, you don't like love, like don't you want to read about it? Like no, I don't. But like I want to read about a lot of things. And that's what I think this show showed me, was that there's a possibility that you can write a lot of different characters and a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different things. So if we're allowing that we are seeing men of all perspectives, of all emotions, of all whatever, then why can't we just say, okay, well, women can do those same exact things, and we can have so many different types of people. I don't care if women are strong or not. I don't care if they're power. I want them to be interesting. I want them to be real people. And like that's what I have such a problem with so much male-centered fantasy, is they're not real people. It's just, if I give me a full-fledged romance where in which they are both real people, regardless of the gender, sure, I'll read it, no problem.
Yeah.
But when it's just some flat addition to any sort of character, any sort of narrative, I'm out. So I think, I don't know, I struggle with it. And I think, and I'm going to say it again, I mean, read N.K. Jemisin. Please read N.K. Jemisin. Because the way that she writes characters and the way that she builds worlds, she's fantastic. And she should have all of her series as television shows right now. And I would be so happy. Her most recent series, it's a duo, it's 2 books. Fantastic. It's so good. It's about people who go through dreams, who heal through their dreams. It's so good.
I would love that.
But this isn't about N.K. Jemisin.
No, but I love that. I think it's a yes and. I think that's kind of where we're coming to, is like yes and. Yes, it is frustrating that a character like Red has no other path. And I find it incredibly empowering that she would go ahead and manipulate the situation to her benefit. Why the fuck not? Right? Like, men would do it. If it was the other way around, men were the one manipulating the situation to benefit themselves, which, by the way, Dunk does this entire series. Dunk is not a knight. Dunk is going to find out whether or not that he could be a knight. Yeah. Whether or not I'm good enough to even enter the tourney. I can't even find anybody that remembered Sir Arlen to vouch for me that he is vouched for me. And in the book, it says, like, I can't really fault Egg for telling this lie to me because I know what it's like to tell a massive lie. And so it says it in that capacity in the book, where it doesn't really say it, it says it more overtly in the show, where he's like, why didn't you fucking knight me, bro? Like, but right, like, so when Dunk lies to manipulate and get ahead and do better for himself, it's considered honor and integrity, and it's a story that we're interested in. Yeah. And when Red does it, it's considered manipulative or like sleeping her way up. And I think it's just the same story, just one has been centered and one has not. And I think that's where the yes and of it is. It's like, yes, I would really enjoy if this world had more stories where we didn't have to see that was the path that women take. Or characters like Arya or Rhaenyra, really, who Rhaenyra really wasn't interested in taking a husband. Never. TBH. She was forced into it, right? So it's like, Alicent too, in many, many ways.
Yeah, she got married off as a child. She didn't have a choice. She didn't even get to a point where she could choose if she wanted a husband or not.
Exactly. So it's like, we're getting these stories where I think like the yes and of it is like, and they're just making the most of that. And I think that in the scope of that world, we have to find that empowering in the way that it is framed. And I think it's both, right? Like it's a feminist critique and it's a feminist empowered move. And I think it has to be both of those things, because if it's only one or the other, I think it falls flat on like, what do these criticisms even produce then? What is the point of criticizing these stories, and what are we hoping to obtain out of it? And like, if the goal is to obtain women who are more, or like stories about women who are more fleshed out and feel more realistic, it's like, okay, well, we've trope-wise like done this one, it's fleshed out.
Yeah, we've got that.
And also, like, where does it go? And I think the rise of romantasy is the yes and too, because romance is, this is just straight up facts, the most sold genre every year by a long shot. $1.44 billion. That's a lot of fucking money that goes into romance stories for people to say, It's just romance. It's like, I don't care if women are buying it. It's $1.44 billion. What the fuck are men buying?
Right.
You know, the next down is mysteries and thrillers. And that's only, I think, like 860 something million. So we're just talking like it's a far gap between the first top selling genre and the second best selling genre of storytelling. And so I think also this is like women taking, okay, this masculine thing, which, like, to me, I don't know, feminine, like, fantasy is so feminine to me. It's like weird that it's a masculine dominated field, in a way. But, you know, taking like what they know is going to sell for them, because romance is selling. It does sell. Right. So, you know, like, that's their version of sleeping their way up the ladder to write something that they know is going to sell, because maybe high fantasy is being dominated by these spaces. And so you add this like romance to the fantasy piece of it, and you promote that as something that could have probably still in some cases been sold as high fantasy or fantasy, but now you're doing what you're reaching an audience that has made the top selling genre $1.44 billion. Like, that's a significant thing. So I think like a lot of these conversations have to be yes and, because there's no question in my mind right now about how women and queer folks in particular are like dominating these book spaces, specifically these book spaces, to the point of like, if you write a book, you have a pretty high chance of it getting adapted. Everything's getting adapted right now. When I found out The Boys of Tommen was getting adapted, I literally could have laid down and wept. I was like, I'm thrilled. This is the happiest moment of my life. So many things are getting adapted, and we want to see more of these stories. We like these stories. We're invested in these stories. We love these characters. We're invested in these characters. So it's like, I think it's a yes and that we can have these women who play within the realms of the world that they're in, these subpar plots, and then when you really dissect them and go into them, have these like moments of real power to them. And I think it's both. I find both lenses to be fascinating, because I did also end the show and be like, ew, there was no fucking women to it. But when I went back and revisited it, I was like, this is a good story, and the pieces that we do get are interesting in the scope of the story that they're telling, right?
Yeah.
You know, did they need to fridge that little girl who was supposed to remind us of Tanzel Too Tall? Can't remember her name. Again, this is a problem that we don't remember her name, but she was, you know, whatever, a flea bottom, that you're like, bitch, just keep your hands to your motherfucking self for 10 seconds so we can get out of the situation. Like, why do you need to be causing all of this trouble? When you're like, no one would ever do this. This would never be a woman. A woman would be much smarter than this. It would totally be Dunk that would be doing this in real life, but okay, fine. You know, so it's like, did she need to be fridged? No, probably not. We probably didn't need that much of this particular story. And we do get a lot about his story in like the other Duncan Egg novellas. But there is a line in the novella where he says, you know, Arian can basically like take out like Sir Duncan, but he's never going to beat like Dunk of Fleabottom. He can't vanquish Dunk of Fleabottom. And so I think that's part of why we got that story. But I think another part is like to have another female character driving this thing forward on why do we feel this way. And, you know, so I think it's interesting, I think, to look at it from both lenses. And I think it's interesting that as we are dissecting any property in the realm of, you know, through the lens of feminism, that we have to maintain both. This is where we are and also where we want to be. And I think that the idea of fantasy, and it could be anything, is also fascinating, because a lot of times we are using fantasy worlds to reflect stories that are happening, typically politically, but you know, we're reflecting these stories already, and so then why not center those more? If we're talking about political things, then why not talk about these things more? And I don't know the answer to that, but I find the philosophical question of it to be fascinating. And I don't know, to you, our resident philosopher.
I mean, I think you're very right. Like I always approach fiction in two different ways, right? It can do two things for us. It can be used for us to figure something out about ourselves, and it can be used for us to figure something out about our greater world, right? Because we're only ever we're sub-creating, and that's a Tolkien term, right?
Yeah.
We're only ever taking things from our world and then sticking them into fantasy. And this is the line that I stand on all of the time. Like, yeah, I want to be able to read about my experiences as a woman from this world in a fantasy world to see how they grapple with it. I do want to see that because it is empowering. But at the same time, I want a different option. And we not to go fully into my work, but in order for us to understand ourselves and each other and to determine who we are and who we should become, we need options. We don't just make ourselves out of nothing. We make ourselves out of the people that we're around, the things that we consume, the world that we exist in. So, art is one of the most substantial concepts that we use to become a person. And so,
Yeah.
if we're not putting possibilities into the zeitgeist, right, into that whole social access, then what we're doing is we're just continuing to limit the way that people understand themselves and who they can possibly be. So it's so hard for me to like find a line with that because yes, I want to be able to spend more time in fantasy worlds where I don't have to think about the world that I'm in. But if I can do anything with fantasy, which means I can talk about all of the problems that we are experiencing in a way that's more palatable, I should be doing that. I should be saying, this is how I grapple with fascism because the hero has grappled with fascism, because I see it in some way and I can actually go out and do it myself. So there's a whole argument here about capitalism and what sells and, like limiting authors' rights and all of those different things, that's important. But I think, yeah, I think it's the stories that we tell are really, really, really important. And the more people we can get telling stories, the better, because then the more people can try and see themselves in stories and see who they could be in stories, which is what frustrates me about male written fantasy so often, is because women's stories are, there's like three and they just cycle through them, right? It's their mother, their um their mother, their wife, or their lover, whether she's actually their lover or a prostitute, and that's all we've got. So I get frustrated, but
Made a mother crone, baby.
right, exactly, that's all we got.
Just right there for us. I'm normally wearing my Celtic made a mother crone too, but I'm not today. No, I think that's all true, and I think this, I'm hoping you'll come back and we'll talk more about these things, because there really is so much to dive into it, and I've created this podcast, as a space to explore this, but I think this has been one of my favorite conversations because it's quite hard to do on your own.
Yeah.
And it really is. It's hard to do it justice on your own, even though these are things I'm always thinking about. I'll like produce an episode of something and I'm like, that really didn't dive into as much stuff as I like really wish I talked about. And why these stories are important, and why, like, one of the my favorite things to cover on the show is any sort of coming of age story, because I think that does young girls, I think, actually get depicted really, I'm not going to say well, but very interestingly in like coming of age stories, particularly ones that center young girls. And I like to like compare that to like my own experience versus like, the experience that they're having and how they're similar, and how you're like, these are just so, that's just so not how it goes. And I think coming of age stories are like one of the most important things, because we're reaching those types of we can be posing these types of questions much earlier to a group of young women who are seeing these shows or reading these books, to be thinking about these things much earlier on and questioning this type of narrative, so that we're not here in our 30s dissecting why we're still in the same place.
Right.
And when are we going to move the needle forward, and who's going to be the person that moves the needle forward? And so I don't know, I just think this is like a larger conversation, and I think Dunk and Egg are like a really great epitome, a Night of the Seven Kingdoms, of something can be really enjoyable, and the story can have a lot of the themes that I am most interested in exploring within a story, and also can completely just subdue the role of women in this world and make them so seemingly insignificant, or only there to drive a story forward for a man. And I simply just don't think that that's even where, I don't know, you would probably be able to speak on this more than I am, but like, I feel like there's like another wave of feminism happening right now, particularly with people our age. And it, like, I'm like, where are those stories? Like, where is like the modern version of Sex in the City that's not focused on the romance, but like literally focused on like, I just want to have brunch with my girlfriends. And like, though, a show that I think did that actually really well was Dollface. And did you ever watch Dollface?
That's good. Yeah. I was gonna say Broad City.
Yeah, Broad City.
But that's our generation. That's not new.
Yeah, so it's like, where are these like stories that can reach people there and not have it be so centered around these narratives, and like really invested in like this new wave of feminism where like women are investing in themselves and their friendships and their lifestyle before they're investing in these partnerships romantically. And I think that that's interesting, and I think that these types of shows, particularly in fantasy, don't get that right, which is why I thought like this conversation between these two girls where it was like really snarky and sarcastic, I was like, oh, okay, I see you, girly pop. Like, like I think that there's something to it, and there's a lot missing. And I feel like, okay, so then the next question is like, well, where do we bridge the gap, and where are the worlds that bridge the gap, and how do we continue to bridge that gap, because it's obviously still there. It's a chasm, right? So it's not a period kind of like there's something finite at the end of this conversation, but something I think very open-ended, which is like, well, what happens during Dunk and Egg season 2? And I will not spoil anything because I know you said you have not read the novellas, but
No, but I have it. I've purchased it. So
okay, it's a nice, it's like you could read the novellas in like a day.
yeah, I figured it was gonna be a nighttime read.
They're like a good, they're like each novella probably takes you 2 hours to read. They're not long, so I know I have mine on my Kindle. I have all of my physical books packed away still. So yeah, I don't know. I find it all really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously do too. I've been working on this stuff for a while now, and I have a new publication coming out in May where I talk about I talk about the moral dilemma of this question. Do we as artists or producers or creators have a responsibility towards representation that does it in a different fashion? Or is art just art? And so I'd love to come back in May. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yes.
There's just major questions about this, and the next generation is going to do this better. I'd really love it if I could kick that off, but we got to get
Me and
there
you
first,
alike.
right? Yeah. But yeah, I think that if we keep talking about how important our stories are, I think we'll move that needle a little bit more, because when we believe that stories don't actually impact us, we think that we could just leave them sort of in the world, and however they come out, they come out. But philosophically, we have something called the social imaginary, where in which we put concepts and meanings into something that we all access throughout our lives and throughout our ability to create things and know things and things like that. And if we're not taking responsibility when we're putting things into that imaginary, when we are creating, we have to understand if we have a responsibility to do that in a way that's actually ethical. And is ethical something that we can define when it comes to something like art? It's all really big questions, and I think that it's important that we're having it now because the internet exists and the internet is infinite and you can find anything. So maybe we could try and find some good stuff.
I love it. Well, back in May you shall be.
Very excited. Can't wait.
I'm immediately going to be like, here are all my ideas for a podcast that we could do in the genre space. Let me know what you think. And you're going to be like, I'm still working on my 1,000 dissertations, and I'll talk to you next year.
Yeah, give me like 6 months.
Yeah. Listen, the timeline keeps getting shorter and shorter. I'm like a list of books that I would like Alex to read. A list of things I would like Alex to watch.
Will have to be next year.
But yeah, books. I know books are podcast. Last time I was like, oh, you should do this. You should read this. You're like, I can't. I simply cannot. I'm like, okay.
Things right now.
That's okay. Yeah. Please bring all of your ideas back. Please come back anytime if there's anything that you ever are like, hello, I'd like to yap about this. If I've not seen it, trust me, I will go out and find it. I will read it. Although I'm having a slow reading year, I'm having a really tough time. I'm in like the weirdest reading slump of my life. I said this to somebody the other day, and she's like, and yet you've probably read like 20 something books already this year. And I was like, no, I've read like 5, like 10, maybe. I don't know. So I know I'm struggling. I'm trying to do it. Clarissa explains it all. Julia does it all. Like, I'm trying so hard to just like expand my pop cultural knowledge, and it's really time consuming.
It's infinite. It's a very large field. And
I'm like, I need to get the basics down. That's why I'm doing. I literally just renewed my Hobbit book today in the library. You have 21 days to read it, and I was like, this is 5 hours of my life that I can't get through. It's like, just fucking do it, Julia. Just take a day and just fucking read this book. So that's where I'm at. But I would love to have you back, and I would love to have you on about literally anything. You want to go episode by episode Game of Thrones? Let's do it. You want to talk about House of the Dragon episode by episode? Like fucking come on for fucking anything that you'd like to do. You're welcome anytime.
See how the season is, maybe.
Okay. All right, my dear. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been
my absolute pleasure. Okay, great. Always love hanging out with you.
Yeah.
Anytime. Literally anytime. I'm just gonna say it again. If there is any time you'd like to be here, you have a seat.
I love that.
So come back in May when your paper is getting published. Send me a copy. I'd love to read it. Okay. All right. Bye, my dear. Thank you so much, Alex, for being a part of this conversation with me. I could chat all day with Alex. She is so incredible, so smart, as you can obviously hear in this incredible conversation that we just had. So hopefully you guys were down for this conversation. This is the most fun I've had on my little feminist podcast, is being able to dive into it with somebody. She is so incredible. Hoping she comes back literally anytime, just putting it out into the universe that Alex comes back and talks to me about House of the Dragon when it comes on over the summer, that we'll be able to go episode by episode and dissect it together, because I just love how she thinks about Game of Thrones. I love how we both approach this world so differently, and how they're both these like incredible feminist deep dives in just different capacities. So thank you so much, Alex. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it out with your friends. Tag us on social media. Leave a comment, rate, review, all that good stuff. It's out on every platform. It's on YouTube. It'll be on Substack. It's on Patreon. And of course, you can always send me an email at feminfuriouspod@gmail.com. The links where you can find more of Femme and Furious or more of Alex are in the show notes. I love you guys so much. I will be back on Tuesday with my deep dive of Binding 13 chapters 21 to 30. So if you're joining me for that, great. We're doing it. And until then, go be honorable in the name of the mother.